It is April 25th, 2024, and I wanted to take some time today to make a video about the pro-Palestinian protests that we have seen sweeping university campuses across the country. And I want to look at it from the perspective of the good, the bad, and the ugly here, because while you are seeing a lot of good, you're also seeing these demonstrations, I would say, used in a way that distracts us from other important things going on. And you also see some true colors of some politicians coming out. Now, as a reminder, these demonstrations officially kicked off at Columbia University. You saw students setting up dozens of camps. They basically made their own community on campus. Now, college officials, politicians did not like that. Billionaire donors also did not like that. And they've been calling for there to be a stronger response to those students. You've even had some individuals calling for the National Guard to be brought in. Now, if you think of the National Guard being called into a college campus and it doesn't immediately make you think of the Kent State massacre, then I think we need to take some time to look back at our history as a country, because the reality is that when you call in heavily armed police officers, the result typically is nothing good. Now, we did see a very strong response at the University of Texas at their campus in Austin this week, as you had students that decided that they were going to have a peaceful walkout. And then you saw the very violent police response. Now, I know that there have been some people that have said, good, we should see that harsh response. We don't want to see another Columbia University. We don't want to see yet another campus where students are able to set up an encampment to say, hey, this is our space. We are calling for our demands to be met. Now, what are their demands? Well, they kind of vary from university to university, but they mainly revolve around calling for their school to condemn Israel's ongoing bombardment of Gaza, calling for their school to divest from companies that support Israel's genocidal war on the Palestinian people in Gaza. So yes, there are plenty of both Democrats and Republicans that are very against these protests, right? They don't want to see this movement continue to grow. And yet at the same time, it's because I would argue we've seen all of this attention, all of this media coverage, and all of this backlash surrounding these protests, that the demonstrations have actually continued to grow, that we've seen them across campuses all around the country. And it makes you wonder if they hadn't really blown it up, right? If you didn't have Fox News warning that we were on the brink of another Holocaust, claiming that these demonstrations are somehow anti-Semitic, even though they include a number of Jewish groups, such as Jewish Voice for Peace. If you didn't have all of that backlash, would we see this movement expand? Or would we see it just contain to Columbia University? Well, that's a question we may not have the answer to right now, because we've seen the opposite happen. But given that we are seeing these protest movements, the good is obviously that these students are raising awareness, right? They're raising awareness about the fact that you have universities here in this country that, as I had talked about in a previous video, an interview that I did with Sabrina Salvati, I would really encourage y'all to go check it out. It's one that I posted yesterday on my channel. We were talking about how these universities have really become businesses. And so they rely so heavily on their billionaire donors and on a number of different companies, and basically whoever is giving them donations. And so as we've seen when it comes to some of the backlash there are people wanting a harsher response, wanting to see what we saw at UT Austin this week at a number of these different universities. And so in a way, the fact that all of this is being live streamed on the internet, it's showing what this crackdown is really looking like. It's showing that these students are not being entitled to any kind of free speech. And it's showing that there are people out there who think that free speech only matters when they agree with the speech, which of course is the exact opposite of what the original intent was there. Now, when it comes down to, I guess I'll call it the bad, maybe some of my concerns personally watching these demonstrations play out, I think my concerns mainly surround the message that is being sent and how it is taking away from the actual cause at hand here. Right now, we are here, we're talking about these protests, we're talking about the fight in between students and in between university officials and local police getting involved. Yeah, we're all talking about that, and that's fine and good. But did you know that there were around 400 Palestinians discovered in mass graves in Gaza this week? Did you know that their bodies were found at two hospitals that were previously occupied by the Israeli military? That some victims were found buried alive while others were executed by the military? Did you know that Palestinian civil defense officials are now on their sixth day of digging up these mass graves at the Nasser and Al Shifa hospitals? Because that's something that's really not making headlines right now. We saw the headlines of when Israel claimed that, oh, they needed to target these hospitals. They claimed that it was some kind of Hamas stronghold. Did you know that they were there torturing and executing these people and burying them alive there? See, when you start to really look into it, it makes sense why you have Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making some kind of ridiculous address claiming that, oh, the US really needs to deal with this problem of its anti-Semitic students that are protesting and that this is something we need to focus on. Yeah, because for him, it is the perfect distraction right now, right? He doesn't want you to talk about the mass graves that his forces created. He doesn't want to talk about the way that Israel is currently continuing on with not just its bombardment, not just killing hundreds, thousands of Palestinians by bombing them, but also killing Palestinians by starving them because it has continued on with this ongoing blockade of the Gaza Strip. The fact that you have hundreds of thousands of Palestinians facing famine right now. That's what Netanyahu definitely doesn't want there to be a talk about, because it serves as a reminder that there is an ongoing genocide case before the International Court of Justice right now, and Israel is guilty as sin. But instead, you have the Israeli prime minister telling you, hey, look over here. Look at this distraction. Look at what's happening in America. That's where the conversation needs to be around. You have, everywhere from Fox News to Joe Biden himself claiming that these demonstrations are somehow anti-Semitic, that we need to stand up against hate-filled speech, as Texas Governor Greg Abbott called it when he pulled that little publicity stunt this week where he called in the Texas state troopers and had them respond to, again, an overwhelmingly peaceful protest. If we don't have the right to free speech in this country, if we don't have the right to peacefully assemble, then what right do we have? It's called the First Amendment for a reason. And yet you have individuals like Governor Abbott insisting that, oh, that's not really a right because we have decided that it is hate-filled speech, right? You're calling for the end to a genocide right now, and yet you are being assaulted by police officers in riot gear, and you are being made out to be the bad guy. That's exactly what the message is that Abbott is sending right now. And it also makes me wonder too, just looking at this politically here, because the reality is that there are plenty of Republicans and Democrats alike who think that Israel needs continued support from the US, who do not support the Palestinians, who don't believe that there is any kind of genocide going on in Gaza, right? Whatever the lies are that they tell themselves to claim that, oh, well, maybe the death toll isn't that high. Maybe Israel hasn't killed 15,000 children in a matter of 6 months. Whatever it is that they're telling themselves to help them sleep at night, right? They don't believe that what's actually happening is happening. So they're in a state of delusion. But I am curious as to why some of these Republicans are so against these protests happening on college campuses right now. Because the reality is that these protests are not good for the Biden administration. They're just not. They're yet another reminder that you have a growing portion of the American public that does not support the Biden administration and their support for Israel committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. We saw those initial protests that happened after October 7th, after Israel really started in with its bombardment, before we even knew how bad it was going to get. You saw people protesting from the US to Europe. And those demonstrations have kind of died down a little bit, right? You don't see nearly as much of that lately, but you do see these demonstrations on college campuses. And this is the younger generation. They are speaking out against the US government, saying, hey, we need to raise awareness about this. You've got Jewish students saying, not in my name. You've got students in a position where they're saying there is a genocide going on the other side of the world. And my country is not only supporting it, but is making it possible. I want to stand up against that. If Republicans were smart, they would sit back and let these protests happen right now. It's insane to me that they are going above and beyond in order to crack down on these demonstrations, because you know what it's doing for them? It's showing just how anti-free speech and anti-freedom to peacefully assemble they actually are. So why would they be doing that? Why would they be putting themselves in a position where the public is going to be able to look at them and say, wait a second, you don't actually support free speech. You don't actually care about our First Amendment rights, especially when it's something that you don't agree with. Well, it's because at the end of the day, it all comes back to the one topic at hand that Republicans and Democrats have been agreeing on for decades now, and that is US support for Israel. Because as we saw this week when the House and then the Senate passed that $95 billion foreign aid package, and then Biden signed it into law, the issue was not over funding for Israel. The issue was not over the question of should the US continue to send weapons and ammunition to the other side of the world so that Israel can continue to commit genocide in Gaza. That wasn't what they were arguing about. They were literally arguing about Ukraine funding. That was the topic that there was some discussion, some back and forth on. It wasn't like you had Democrats and Republicans really stepping up and saying, well, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't approve $26 billion for Israel. Maybe we should look for some accountability for our close ally, or else we eventually are going to get dragged to the world court for aiding and abetting genocide in Gaza. But I think the fact that you have Democrats and Republicans both who are so against these, again, peaceful protest on college campuses, the fact that you're seeing so much pushback against that serves as a reminder of just how powerful the Israeli lobby is here in this country. It's a reminder that all of these politicians are ultimately beholden to entities like AIPAC, that they have sold their souls. And in doing so, now they have to look completely ridiculous as they prove just how anti-free speech they really are when it comes to those who are literally just calling for accountability for Israel. That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. So when it comes down to these protests that we're seeing at universities across the country, I think it is kind of a mixed bag at the end of the day. I mean, on one hand, it is great to see the awareness, right? It's great to see the younger generation saying, what can we do? Not in my name. I do not want to be responsible for supporting genocide on the other side of the world. I do not want to be responsible for the extermination of the Palestinian people, because that's what this ultimately boils down to. And when you have that awareness, that shows that something is getting through, even if it's just to the younger generation. It shows that we are seeing a people that are not going to forget about this. It is not going to be the typical Americans who just think that they have to support Israel and don't ask any questions about it. No, the generation that we're raising up right now, they are going to be asking questions and demanding answers and demanding accountability at the end of the day. I think that is my biggest hope that comes out of this is, how many of those people who are protesting today, how many of them are going to one day become members of Congress themselves? And sure, they may sell their souls, right? They may completely turn on their beliefs right now, but I don't think that all of them will. I think if anything gives me hope in the grand scheme of things, there is that little bit of hope there. But of course, at the same time, the biggest thing that I'm worried about in all of this is the way that the media is able to spin it, the way that there is able to be this shift in narrative to where you have the mainstream media convincing people that, oh, these protests are somehow anti-Semitic or somehow pro-terrorist, so to speak. Meanwhile, they're the ones who are being pro-terrorist by continuing to support Israel, but that's another story for another time. And it it is the concern when you see just how much money there is in the Israeli lobby, in the mainstream media, in politics as a whole, because the truth is that it is going to take a lot to push back against that. It is going to take a lot to challenge that narrative. And I know that because I've been doing everything I can to challenge those narratives for nearly a decade now. And I can tell you that there are times when it feels like the public is more awake, when it feels like the public is more aware of what's going on. And there are times that something can happen tomorrow and members of the public who were on board, who you think that you're getting through to them and getting them to see all of the very serious concerns about the direction in which the US is currently headed. The fact that, Biden is signing off on all of this foreign funding. He's trying to pick World War III in every possible direction, it feels like. That people sometimes see that, and then other times they can get a little too distracted. So, just a few things to keep in mind as you're continuing to watch the coverage of these protests, as you're continuing to see the way that the media is spinning this, the way that it is addressing this. And I'm also curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this protest movement as well. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And always bear in mind that when it comes to the establishment, if there is anything that they will do to create a distraction, to spin a narrative, and to pit the public against each other, then that is something they will do freely. And it's always something to keep an eye on, especially when it comes to times like this. And that is something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. If you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.